an inch. Whoa! Almost got some grass there. Big shooter, come on now. Hi everybody, I'd like to welcome you to another table talk. Today we're going to talk about my modified F18 version 5. This is actually the second F18 version 5 that I built. The first one was primarily just completely stock, and I built that one out of model plane foam. So I built this one out of some different materials, and I also made some modifications for aesthetics as well as some other reasons, which I'll discuss here briefly. What I wanted to touch base on first, though, is I had a discussion with a fellow named Tahir. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If I'm not, I apologize. On my blog post after I shot the table talk on my F22 version 5. Now I just wanted to discuss briefly what I like to do often is if I want to check sort of ratios, whether the plane's long enough or if something doesn't look quite the right size, this is just like a three view or of the F18 Super Hornet. I actually just grabbed this off of Wikipedia. And then what I do is that, for example, the real Super Hornet, you can find these dimensions obviously on Wikipedia. So it's 18.31 meters long, wingspan 13.62. So if, for example, you want to check is, how is my length, for scale purposes, is the length of this plane sort of in proportion to the real plane. So what I do is I like to use the metric ones because it's a lot easier to do that than it's this many feet long plus this many inches. That for me, that my brain just starts to get fried. So essentially, then what I do is I just take for here I've taken the length divided it by the wing, or the length divided by the wingspan gives me a ratio of 1.34. So if I know that my plane, for example, this F18 is going to have a 27.5 inch wingspan, and I want to know sort of how long it sort of should be if it's close to scale dimensions, is then I take this number 1.34, multiply it by the wingspan, and then that should tell me essentially how long it should be. This is actually very close to scale length. It should be about 36.85, I think, inches, and I'm at about 36.5. The other thing you can do with these diagrams is if you want to sort of resize your, let's say your elevons, you can do the same sort of thing. You take I kind of like to use the wingspan as the sort of the standard when I'm playing around with ratios. So again, on this little diagram, I mean, you're going to probably be measuring it in centimeters or millimeters, but you can get a ratio of the wingspan to the elevon span, let's say. And then, again, you come back here, figure out what that ratio is. You come back here to your real plane. I already know that the wingspan is 27.5 inches long. So how wide should my elevons be in order to look scale? The elevons in this plane are actually a little bit narrow to be scale, but not too bad. So that wasn't anything that I really played around with. But if you're looking for ideas, something as simple as that I found. And again, you have to do a little bit of math. But nothing too high tech, nothing that I can't do on my trusty dollar store calculator, solar powered dollar store calculator. The other thing is, looking at these diagrams or even bigger pictures, sort of the actual airplane. One of the mods that I made here was I sort of added my own missile rails, as you can see here. So all I did was I just looked at those little diagrams and sort of figured out how long they should be in order to look properly scale, and you can use these for that. Very, very simple and kind of easy source of giving you ideas if you want to modify anything. I'll also discuss on these V5 planes and some other designs. The wing plate, when you print out the plans, the wing plate, I've sort of highlighted the two halves here. On this is the page 1 of the plans, obviously printed off just on 8.5 by 11. But what I like to do, especially if I'm going to do modifications, is I cut these out, the pieces of paper out, and before I glue them onto the foam, is I actually tape the two halves together. So now I've got it's a bit cumbersome to handle because it's a big sheet of paper. But then, you know, when I start doing all my measuring to do modifications especially, it's so much easier because the wing plate, especially if you move the motor mount forward, as you saw in my F22, it has a domino effect. There's a lot of tabs and things like that that you have to move around, and it's so much easier when those two halves of the wing plate are together. So I should mention, I'm in the process right now of building actually an RC Powers T50 V5. So I've started a build log, and in the second part of the build log, it's actually very, very detailed. But I'll have a link in the blog post supporting this video where you can go look at that, and you know, it kind of gives you a lot more detail on my thought process, because I'm now actually building that plane and modifying it. So you can follow along there as I progress along, although, you know, we're getting close to Christmas, so there may be some gaps there as I'm you know, in a food coma or being spoiled rotten by Santa Claus. But anyway, so the F18 both in real world and RC has a very special place in my heart. I served close to 30 years in the Canadian Air Force, and I sort of grew up with the CF-18 in my job, and I'm retired and it's still kicking. But I was very lucky to be in Cold Lake, Alberta when the F-18s were first arriving, CF-18s were first arriving, and I was very blessed to get backseat rides on several occasions in the backseat of a real F-18. So you know, there's no amusement park ride as good as that. And then the F-18 version 3 came out just as I was at a point in my RC park jet career where I was kind of struggling just to, you know, make a big breakthrough sort of in my skills and my confidence. You know, I just didn't feel like I was on a plateau. I wasn't really making any progress. And then when the F-18 version 3 came along, it just really helped me turn a corner. And I've logged hundreds and hundreds of flights on the F-18 version 3, and if this version 5 hadn't come out, I would probably still be, you know, tinkering around and playing with it and building one and flying one and modifying it. But this little baby is my second favorite out of the V5s, next to the F22. It's a really serious little sports car of a plane. Now, one of the things that I tried to do when I modified it was I tried to get it to do better high alpha, because I sort of learned how to do high alpha with the F-18 version 3, and just essentially my modifications didn't work. I think in one of my videos I mentioned that I might have bought myself maybe 5 or 10 degrees more angle of attack, but not even quite getting close to scale yet. So that's fine. You know, I'm not worried about it. I've got other planes that I can do high alpha with. But you know, this is just a heck of a fun to fly, and a really aerobatic, quick, and agile plane. So my build is some of the modifications that I did, primarily moving the motor forward by 1 inch, is because of the materials that I chose to build with. So again, similar to the F-22, my fuselage, wing plate, vertical stabilizers, elevons are all made with Dollar Tree foam or Adams Ready board. What I chose to use, you know, lesson learned from the very first plane I built completely out of Dollar Tree foam, was on these nacelles here on the bottom. I'm actually using model plane foam. It's actually model plane foam grade B, I think. Not that that's important, but yeah. So that's what I'm using. So it gives it a lot more durability and more strength longitudinally than Dollar Tree foam with the paper off. Plus, it's lighter than Dollar Tree foam with the paper left on. So I'm flying this right now with the setup I have. I think I'm at around 20. Let's say I'm probably right around 20.9 ounces. The metric conversion escapes me right now. That's with a with a 3-cell 2200 battery. I like the weight. It just it helps it. The F-18 is not the most stable plane in the world because of these because of these angled vertical stabilizers, but that just seems to give it a really good weight. Okay, so let's talk about my thought process with the modifications. I wanted it again. I wanted to make. I was hoping that making these lurks or leading edge root extensions here in the front were going to give me a bit more lift in the nose and help with high alpha. It didn't do that, but it actually made the flight experience a bit smoother. So here's something that that I did was, again, because I've flown the F18 version 3 so much and I'm used to just how that looks, and I like the, you know, a lot of the dimensions. What I did was, again, you know, just some basic math. The wingspan on this is 27.5, and the wingspan on the F18 version 3 is 30. The good news is if you decide to buy the plans to the version 5 and you're a member of RC Powers, you get the plans to the version 3 for free, so you can, you know, you can kind of cross-pollinate there to get your F18 looking and, you know, performing however you want with using these plans. So what I did then was I used the tiled plans, which are the ones that, you know, you print off on your home printer. You know, find the pages that you need to put a particular piece of the plane together, tape them together, and then I just cut these out of scrap foam. So here's the lurks at about 91%, which is, you know, pretty close to what the ratio needs to be, going from a 30-inch wingspan plane to a 27.5-inch wingspan. And I also went with, you know, I printed this off. This is kind of the dog tooth for the front wing, or for the front of the wing. And then I decided I wanted to use the vertical stabilizer size for from the F18 version 3. The ones on the version 5, you know, aesthetically to me they just looked a little bit too tall and a bit too pointed. Now these ones are probably a little bit too wide across the top to, you know, to look scale, but they're working really well. And if I built it again, I might actually reduce them again. But these, I made these out of scrap foam, so now if I decide to build another one, I've already got those pieces, so it takes a lot of the you know, I've already done the figuring once, and now I can just use those as templates from this point on. So that's essentially you know, what we ended up with, which seemed to work out really well for the lurks, the dog tooth here on the wing, and my vertical stabilizers. So starting from the front, the canopy, I sort of tapered the canopy front and back. If you built it stock, the canopy is sort of more, you know, squared at the front and the back. So all I did was I just sort of, on the very front piece in the center here, and the same thing in the back, was I just trimmed, I think, like I measured an 1/8 of an inch in either side here, so that when I put the canopy on, I just sort of curved these two side pieces in, and I think hopefully it makes it look a little bit more scale. And I'm also hoping that, you know, because it's more of a, you know, a teardrop shape, that it's not it's producing less drag as well. So I modified my airfoils. The F18 version 5 plans only come with templates for KF2. So I use those sort of as a reference point, like you'll see when you go to the blog post on my T50, current T50 build, how I sort of start figuring that out. So I'm running about 40% again here at the wing root, not including the leading edge root extension, so about 40% here. Now what I found with experimenting with the F18 version 3 is, you know, in the and other planes I should say, compared to the F22, this has a swept wing, but it's not as aggressively swept. So what I found with these planes that have a bit more straighter wing is, rather than normally I would taper down at the wingtip to about 35%, so I kept this at 40%, just because the wing is, you know, it tends to be a bit more straight wing, and that seems to give me the exact kind of feel that I like. I should also mention, very similar to what I did with the F22, was the battery. On the plans, there's again a little battery bay platform. I didn't bother using that. I think I cut that out because I'm using, again, paperless Dollar Tree foam, which, you know, one layer of it is kind of thin. I think, looking in there, what I did was I just cut that battery tray out of Dollar Tree foam, stripped the paper off of it, and then just sort of laminated it to the very bottom, just to give me extra strength, you know, for pulling the battery in and out. So my battery is nice and low. I'm actually just going to measure it right now because I don't think I've ever measured it. Yeah, okay, so my battery is, where my battery sits is actually about 1.125 inches, almost 1.25 inches actually, below the wing plate. So again, similar to what I discussed in the F22, and same thing with the F18 version 3. One of the reasons why the F18 version 3 was so great to fly was that the battery on that was quite low in relation to the wing plate. So it was dubbed the smart plane, and it had a tendency to want to right itself all the time. So I wanted those same tendencies in this plane, and thus far it's working out really well. It's a very, very stable plane. And but I'm not running into problems where I feel like, you know, having that weight low is affecting how it flies or performs. So again, the motor mount the motor's moved about 1 inch further forward, just like I did with the F22. The F18 version 5 seems to have, for me anyway, for both of them that I built, I started off with the stock. The stock CG is right there, which is essentially in the middle of the, there's like a dark rectangle in the middle of the CG spectrum. I always start off with that. And I ended up actually, my CG is like almost 1.25 inches further ahead. So I don't know if, because of what I did with the lurks and the, I want to say that my previous one I was actually about 5/8 of an inch ahead of stock. So I seem to have really pushed that further forward, you know, maybe with the change to the wing and the lurks and moving the motor forward. I'm not really sure. I had hoped that was going to help with high alpha performance by having, you know, more weight, a lot more weight forward, which tends to help in most other planes, but it didn't really seem to help too much in this one. I modified again my ailerons. You can see the ailerons are fairly big. Again, I will have exact dimensions for those on the blog supporting this video. Again, because the F18 has a sort of almost a completely straight trailing edge, this was a lot easier to figure out than it was on the F22 and now the T50, which has taken a little bit more advanced math for me to get that figured out. So anyway, my reinforcements, I'm actually using, I think the plans again call for like 3mm carbon tube. I'm using 4mm carbon rod in the front, or the front, this is the back, silly. Behind the prop slot and in front of the prop slot. One thing about the F18 version 3 and sort of straight wing planes like this is that they don't tend to distribute the wing loading, maybe like say a MiG or an SU. When I flew my first F18 version 3, I built it way too heavy and I actually watched the wing snap in the air. So I'm always very conscious of that, but luckily it seems that this is a really super stiff wing with those 4mm carbon rods in there. So because of the Dollar Tree foam, I've got one chunk here of bamboo skewer across the back here on the back plate. Now, you know, second guessing it, I probably could have got away with not using this now because it's locked in underneath this model plane foam, and because the vertical stabilizer comes down through the bottom here, this is actually a very strong area of these nacelles, so I probably could have got away with not using that to prevent torsional strength. Some reinforcement in the elevons, and especially here along the hinge line, just like in the F22, because I removed the paper from the Dollar Tree foam when I make the hinges. I'm not sure if I showed, yeah, I think I did show this in the F22. I also put tape. I put tape on both sides of my hinge line. I do that with all my planes, just on the elevons primarily. So that does perhaps make it a little bit heavier in the back, which is maybe why I've had to put my battery fairly far forward. On these vertical stabilizers, when you cut them out, there's like it's actually a score and fold, and you normally have 2 layers of foam. Now, because I built them out of Dollar Tree foam, when I went to fit them in, they were actually a bit too narrow. So the the vertical stabilizer was sort of flopping around a little bit, and it was really hard to get it solid. Luckily, I had some scrap 3mm Depron, I think, and I grabbed a chunk of that and stuck it in there to see if that would sort of help make it wide enough to get it at the right angle. Unfortunately, it worked out quite well, so I just sort of glued that on to the piece that comes down in behind. Now, in the vertical stabilizer, I have I have some bamboo skewer as well. Now, you notice with my rudders, all I did with my rudders was, after I modified the vertical stabilizers using the downsized piece from the F18 version 3 plans, I just stayed with the version 5 size rudders. I was used to those from the original version 5, and they're not terribly big, but they actually are very, very effective, for flying around. And one thing I find with airplanes, again, like the F-22 and the F-18, with these angled tails, is sometimes you get up into the wind and your nose will wander a little bit more if you're, say, in a 5 to 10 mile an hour wind. So having that rudder there really, really helps. It just helps you get that nose locked in and bring it around the turn nice and smooth without the nose wandering off either up or down. So it helps you keep it steady in the yaw. Plus, if you're wanting to fly around slow, I mean, it's a pretty good slow flyer. It really helps to have the rudders to steer with. Elevons, I didn't really do anything to the elevons. Those are, other than the reinforcement, those are scale. One thing about the, and I didn't mention, I'm not sure if I mentioned this in the F-22 build. Pardon me. One thing that I like to do, and you probably want to do on the nose here, this is actually the type of glue that I build with. I actually have found this at the dollar store quite a while ago. It's called Craft Medley Premium Craft Glue. I got it at the Dollar Tree, and luckily it's exactly the same as Foam Cure, which is made by Bob Smith Industries, sold by Hobby King. But it's getting more expensive for me to get, if I can get it at all, because it's now it's on some dangerous shipping list if you're trying to buy it online. So that stuff works out super well. So I'm not sure if you can see when I sit it down here, but the nose is actually pretty close. It's only about, I don't know, I guess my finger width sort of off the ground. So sometimes when you land, it's the plane will rock forward and the nose will touch. So to keep the foam protected, all I did was I took some of that glue. Now you could use epoxy as well, but epoxy turns yellow. So I just took some of that glue, and sort of from this air intake here for cooling, I just put some glue on there and then took some scrap foam and just made it smooth, nice and smooth. So it's actually it's kind of more slippery and very, very durable. One thing about Dollar Tree foam, especially after you take the paper off, is it can tear and gouge. Like I've got a few gouges in mine already from hitting it with the sandpaper when I sanded it. So yeah, if in areas like this, if you can protect it, and same, I put a little bit of that stuff here on the bottoms of these nacelles. I'm not sure, maybe because I didn't build it properly, I don't know. I had a little bit of problem with my fuselage separating from the motor mount down here at the bottom. So I just used actually a little piece of that mesh fiberglass drywall tape, put that on there, and then smeared again some more. Actually, yeah, you can see there, I think I did use epoxy there, so it's a bit yellow there, but it's made that area super strong. All right, so quick and dirty on my current setup for flying. You watched some of my videos. I've kind of played musical motors on this plane. I've got 40 flights on it now, and this is the 4th motor change. And I'm not going to say this is going to be my last, because guaranteed I'll probably change it again. But I've actually gone back to the original motor that I started running in it, but I'm using what is now very quickly becoming my favorite prop after being recommended to me by RC Plane Pirate from the UK. I'm running the 6x4 APC gas prop on the DYS 2208-2600, exactly the same as what I'm running on my F-22 version 5. I'm actually using a 40 amp speed controller. I could get away with a 30, but I'm using a 40 amp. This is actually a tough, durable RC timer speed controller. I know I normally use Turnigy Plush, but this one has lasted me a long time, and it's a little bit heavier than the Turnigy Plush. So again, like I talked about, I may have talked about in other videos, I like to still try and keep my battery fairly far back. So if I can just sneak my speed controller a bit further forward and sneak my battery back by, you know, a quarter of an inch or so, because the battery on almost all my planes is a third or more of the total weight. So where that's, you know, a quarter of an inch to a half an inch difference in where you can get that battery can really help with your balance. So for servos, I'm using again my favorite RC timer servos. I've got my these are 9-gram servos for my Elevons, custom made push rods. I had, you know, these, I actually had to make new push rods because these are pretty long push rods because I moved the motor forward, and I also wanted to shift these servos as far forward as I possibly could to get weight forward to compensate for the weight of the paper on the Dollar Tree foam behind the trailing edge of the KFs. 5-gram servos for the ailerons and the rudders. This is just the rudder servo poking down from up above. So yeah, it helps keep it light. Sometime in the future, I'm going to do a bit more of a write-up on servos that I like to use. So I'm just going to quick and dirty power things up here, and I'll show you kind of my throws. This, again, because it's you know, it's a very well balanced plane, and you know, not terribly heavy. It rotates very quickly and easily around all 3 axes. So I don't find I need a whole ton of throw to get it to move around. Alright, let's put all that nonsense in there. So in the pitch, I've got an inch of throw in the pitch, in the Elevons. In the roll, I'm actually only about 3/4 in the Elevon, and actually about 5/8 in my aileron. Now, like I discussed with the F22, what I found, again, this is a bit more compared to, say, MiGs and Sioux, which, you know, I mean, obviously I fly the MiG 35 a ton. I found that to get my rolls to be a bit more crisp and axial is I have a bit closer ratio between my aileron throw and my Elevon throw in the roll than I would say with my MiGs. And then in the yaw, I've got about 3/4 of an inch of travel. So again, they're not huge rudders. And again, one of the reasons why, like I mentioned in my F22 video, is that, you know, sometimes I want to take it up high, slow it down almost to a stall, and then kick the nose over. So it helps to have that, you know, big chunk of rudder throw there. You know, obviously when I'm flying along, and I mentioned, you know, if my nose starts to wander, I'm just kind of feathering in a very small amount. Now I should mention, you know, the way I set my planes up, you know, you may find you want to go a little bit differently and go with a little bit more throw depending on the expo that you use. I fly with quite low expo, or fairly low expo. I only have about 15% of expo in my my pitch and my roll, and about 20% in the rudders. You know, I changed the way I have a video on, you know, how I sort of adapted to 2-finger flying as opposed to being a thumb guy. I'm more of a modified pinch guy now. So I used to fly with a ton of expo and a ton of throws, so now I've simplified that. So my throws, compared to what you might like, if you like to fly with more expo, you might want to start with bigger throws than that. Always go with what RC Powers recommends first. Get your first few flights out of the way. Get it balanced on the CG the way you like it, and then you can start dialing it in. So that's why my throws might seem a little bit lower than what a lot of people use, because I'm using very low expo, so when I move the stick, things start to happen a little bit faster maybe than what some other folks use. All right, I think that's about it. I think I've covered everything that I wanted to cover. Again, if I haven't, I'll watch the video before posting the blog post, and I'll cover everything in the blog post. F18 version 5, again, just a real ton of fun to fly. Just like a real little sports car of a plane, very aerobatic. Oh, I'll just mention quick and dirty here. Actually, what I made these missile rails out of, and these are primarily for aesthetics, so you may want to go without them because they can get, you have to be a little bit more careful getting this in and out of the car. I've just got a couple of widths of, I think, scrap Depron or scrap model plane foam, and again, just using that little diagram I showed you from Wikipedia, I just sort of sized what I thought looked right, glued those two together, and then actually on the bottom what I did was I split a popsicle stick actually in half, and then I put a half of a popsicle stick on the bottom of each of them and glued that on with epoxy, just to give it a little bit more rigidity, so you don't end up, if you store the plane wrong and you end up with one of your missile rails bent like a banana or something. It helps keep those straight and a bit more durable. Now what I do have to do, be careful of though, is the only time they've actually become a problem is I'm left-handed, so I tend to launch my planes. I tend to like to hold my planes. Actually, I'll do it this way. You might be able to see it better. I sort of hold my planes here because my CG is normally about here. I like to hold it around the CG, and then I 50-60% throttle, give it a toss in the air, probably about like that angle. So what I have to be careful of is a couple of times this silly missile rail actually caught the sleeve of my sweatshirt or my jacket, and did kind of a goofy thing. So that's the only thing I have to be careful of. But I think it, a little extra fussing around, that actually looks pretty cool, and it might, I don't know, it might actually provide a little stability, like a sort of an outrigger style of stability in the roll axis. I'm not really sure. Maybe I'm just talking through my hat. But all right, folks, there we go. Again, blog post link will be down below. That's going to have the links to all the stuff that I talked about, as well as some more details, more detailed pictures. I'll get some detailed pictures of those ailerons and those dimensions. I think everything else I've covered here. And yeah, so thanks for watching. Blue skies, calm winds to everyone. Park jet noise, the other sound of freedom. Take care, everyone.